Say the words natural gas or oil, and you instantly think of a drilling rig. But did you know most oil and gas equipment in the field is actually used after the drilling is done? It's hardware for the two very essential processes called completion and production. Completion is the process of finishing off a well and optimizing it for maximum flow of natural gas or oil. Production is the treatment and separation the hydrocarbons undergo. And right now, you're going to get an inside look at completion and production. The real scoop on how all this equipment helps bring gas and oil to you. Once you know a little more about completion and production, you'll start recognizing the related equipment everywhere. Now, right now, some of the best guys in the field are going to give you the lowdown on what all this equipment does. Before you know it, you'll be explaining the difference between a separator and a frac tank, just like a pro. Laying the groundwork for the completion process is the installation of casing. This actually happens before completion when the drilling rig is still on site.
Casing's very important. It offers integrity to the wellbore. It also provides a pathway for all our oil, water, and gas to be lifted to the surface. It's made of a strong steel, and multiple layers of it will be put in place to provide a protective barrier between anything produced and the groundwater. At the surface, the casing is suspended in the wellhead, which secures it in place.
Gas and oil flow through the casing by way of perforations made with a perforating gun. These small holes let hydrocarbons flow from the surrounding rock formation into the well. Many wells use only casing to flow gas and oil. But if a well has lower pressure, tubing can be installed inside the casing. The tubing's smaller diameter actually helps the oil and gas flow more easily. Tubing can also be used in very high pressure wells for added strength. Completion often begins with a process called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking for short. During fracking, water, sand, and very small amounts of other additives are pumped down the well's casing. The additives include compounds found in some common consumer products. When the water, sand, and additives exit the wellbore into the rock formation, they create cracks in the rock. The cracks allow the hydrocarbons to flow at a desirable volume.
We bring our frac equipment in, consisting of high-pressure pumps, sand bins, tanks, and other associated equipment. We pump through our frac stack over here. It's a piece of equipment you see on top of the wellhead. It has 4 inlets to handle the large volume of water and sand that will be pumped at a high rate. After our frac job, we will remove the frac tree from the wellhead and then replace it with a production tree.
Fracking works the same whether the well's drilled vertically or horizontally. Fracking typically takes from half a day to 5 days, depending in part on the number of formation areas fracked from each well. Once the job is done, most of the heavy equipment moves on to the next location. Immediately following fracking, the well is reopened to start flowing again. Now, at this point, the well is bringing up naturally occurring salt water from the rock formation, the fracturing fluid pumped downhole, and excess sand remaining from the fracking procedure.
Well, we will have some of our frac fluid return flow to us, and it will flow back up through the wellhead. However, we no longer use our frac stack that was used in our fracking operations, but instead it will flow through these 2 valves here and then on through a choke manifold back behind me. And if you notice behind that, there are some temporary storage tanks on location, and it'll flow our fluids into those.
Before fracking and during flowback, you'll see a lot of those temporary storage tanks at a well location. Beforehand, the mobile tanks hold the fluids and sand that'll soon be sent downhole. After fracking, the produced water flowing back out goes directly to these mobile tanks and eventually will be removed. Once the gas and oil begin flowing from the well, some of the sand used during fracking may still be present. So another piece of temporary equipment, the sand separator, can remove the sand and some of the remaining fluid from the gas and oil. The sand and fluid are sent to temporary storage tanks too. The last step of completion is removing the frac valve and stack and installing the top part of the wellhead, what we call the Christmas tree. As you might guess, this part gets its name from the way the valves are arranged on the tree. They can all look a little different, but they have one basic function: controlling surface flow of gas and oil for the production phase that's coming up.
If you remember, we said the top of the casing was hung off in the wellhead. This happens here in the B section. On top of that, we have a series of valves which we'll use to regulate flow at surface. We have our primary and secondary master valve, wing valves on the side, and on top we have a swab valve. We also have a safety valve. The safety valve can be shut off in an emergency. It can be operated from a pilot pneumatically or by a computer.
The gas and some remaining fluids flow through the wellhead to production equipment and then onto the pipeline. But before we talk about the production phase, let's look at some common ways of coaxing oil and gas from wells that aren't producing at desired volumes. Sometimes a producing well needs a little oomph to get the gas and oil flowing like they should. Water in the well can literally weigh down the gas and prevent it from moving up the casing and tubing. And flow also can be reduced because older wells eventually become depleted. They have less pressure and weaker flow. So we use a technique called artificial lift to stimulate the well's flow. It's a term that covers a variety of procedures that help the well flow more freely. When gas is being weighed down by fluids, one of the easiest ways to stimulate flow is by using something in every washroom: soap. That's right, we actually add soap into a gas well. The foaming action lightens the water holding down the gas.
This is a soap stick launcher. It's one of several types that we use. This one happens to be a manual. We have some automated soap stick launchers that work off a computer. We basically drop a stick of soap in these wells. A soap stick goes to the bottom of the well, foams the liquid up, and it allows the gas to come to surface a lot easier.
Another way to optimize oil and gas production is a plunger lift system.
This is a plunger. Our plunger system works based on a flow computer here on location. This plunger is usually in the catcher. The well, when it loads up with fluid, it'll go into what we call an off cycle. The plunger at that time will fall down through the tubing, through the fluid. It'll hit a bumper spring at the bottom of the well, and the pressure will build. The well kicks back on. The plunger creates a seal. It will come up the tubing. It'll bring the fluid with it, and then the gas will follow. Then the well will go back in an off cycle, and the cycle will repeat.
Get this, on a 10 or 12,000 foot well, the plunger can fall for 45 minutes, but it only takes about 15 to 20 minutes for the device to rise back up. Why the difference? The plunger, it passes through the heavy fluid on the way down. Now, on the way up, strong gas pressure is acting as the driving force, propelling it far faster than it fell. Let's talk about a gas lift. This method of artificial lift actually uses gas to get more gas. Produced gas is forced down the casing to push the heavy oil and water up through the tubing and out of the wellhead. This lets more gas flow out. You may end up pumping almost half the treated gas you're producing back down the casing to eventually get more flowing out. Well, here's a fact for you. Plungers and gas lifts need at least a 5-to-1 ratio of gas to oil. If a well's producing mostly oil and not much gas, the well may need a pump jack. Pump jacks, or pumping units, are the most costly method of artificial lift. For that reason, they're often the last option chosen. Pump jacks are pretty simple, really. Think of an old hand pump that brought up water. Well, this is basically a gas or electric-powered hand pump on a super big scale.
The polish rod is at the surface, which is hung on the pump jack. The sucker rods are below that, and they are connected to the pump on bottom. And on the upstroke, you bring fluid into the tubing, and the gas comes up the casing. The gas flows to the bottom of the wellhead. The fluid flows to the top of the wellhead. They all meet at the flow line, and then they go to the production equipment.
By the way, the sucker rods in one well can weigh 15,000 pounds total. I bet you have a couple of questions, like, how's all this added downhole equipment installed on working wells? And, well, what if the well doesn't already have tubing needed for an artificial lift? Well, here's your answer: a workover rig. Also called a completion rig, this unit looks like a mini drilling rig, but it doesn't drill. It's brought in for a few days to, say, run tubing or put in a pump at a wellhead, and then it's off to the next location.
On the completion, we run the tubing, and then we run the new pump and rods, and then we put the well back to pumping. Later on, when they come back in to repair the well, they call it a workover rig. You change out the pump, rods, possibly tubing, on the pump jack.
No matter how the gas, oil, and water were brought up from the formation, they all run in this flow line. From the wellhead to the next step, production. Production equipment separates the oil and gas and compresses the gas if needed. Let's concentrate on wells producing mostly natural gas first.
From the wellhead, our fluids will travel through our flow line to undergo initial processing here on location. The first step is the production unit, where our fluids will travel through a system of baffles to separate the oil, gas, and water. The gas can then travel to a secondary separation and then to sales. The oil and water will be sent to our heater treater, where heat will be applied to increase the efficiency of their separation. Once separated, they'll be sent to be stored in stock tanks here on location.
From production, gas can flow through the pipeline depending on processing and pressure, or it can go to a gathering system of pipelines running from the wellhead to a central location for additional processing and compression. When a well is producing primarily oil, you'll see equipment on site that's very similar to what you find at a gas well location. A separator isolates gas from the fluids. The oil and water go to a heater treater, which separates them. Like gas, oil flows on to a central location or is stored in tanks on site and later removed by tanker truck. Oil or gas can receive still more processing and some compression. This happens at central facilities, also called a central delivery point or CDP. With both gas and oil, the hydrocarbons are feeding into the CDP from a pipeline gathering system from many wells. At a CDP that handles natural gas, you may see separators or dehydrators, which remove much of the remaining fluids before gas travels to you. And you'll find compressors of varying number and size depending on how many wells are feeding into the CDP. Compressors boost the gas to the proper pipeline pressure. Gas volume is recorded by a sales meter. And finally, gas travels on through the pipeline system, eventually reaching your home. A CDP that's gathering oil has some different equipment. Pipelines from the gathering system first feed into a tank battery.
The oil travels from the tanks through a set of filters to the LACT unit. LACT is short for Lease Automatic Custody Transfer. The LACT unit checks the integrity of the oil, and if it does not meet the requirements, it is rerouted back through the heater treater where it's reprocessed. If the oil does meet the requirements, it is sent through an oil sales meter, then through a pump where the pressure is boosted up. The oil is sent into a high-pressure oil pipeline for sales.
All the produced water you've seen stored in tanks everywhere has its own central location. The water is taken by tanker truck or pipeline gathering system to saltwater disposal facilities. This is the most common way to dispose of produced water.
Well, we send it through a series of tanks, starting with a steel settling tank. We use a set of walls inside that tank to slow the water down, which will drop some of the solids out, the silicates, the sands, and any remaining hydrocarbons. And then from that point, we'll pump it into these tanks behind us. The water comes from these tanks over to a high-pressure, high-volume pump, and we'll send it down the well from that point to about 11,000 feet.
Saltwater injection wells are located miles away from any groundwater sources to protect the area's fresh water supply. Just like I promised, you're an expert. Well, almost. You can tell a wellhead from a soap stick launcher, and you know the difference between a heater treater and a storage tank. Without the pointers we got today, it wouldn't be so obvious what all these tanks, pipes, pumps, and other equipment do. But thanks to the folks who helped you learn, you understand that completion and production equipment has a big role in providing us the fuels we need in a usable state. Hey, we sure appreciate you hanging out with us today. Take care now.